Welcome to the Kapital News. I'm your host, Alex Kreitis. Today is Tuesday, April 13th, 2021. Thank you so much for joining me. Title of today's podcast, Summer Riots in the Streets. This is a question mark. However, I think we are likely going to see a lot of protests and perhaps even riots in the streets this year in the United States. Most definitely they're going to continue taking place around the world, but I think they're going to be coming back home here as well. And it might very well be in the spring, might be taking place in the fall as well. But we are likely going to see a redux of last year, to say the least. And I think there's going to be a number of reasons as to why that could be the case. And we're going to discuss a little bit today the trial of former officer Derek Chauvin, of course, the officer who was involved in the death of George Floyd. So I want to talk about that because the prosecution has rested their case, and the defense is now putting on their witnesses and stating their case. So we're going to talk about that a little bit here today. I want to get to market performance because we had U.S. inflation data come out. We'll get to that momentarily. A lot of geopolitical events taking shape. We mentioned these last week with a lot of the positioning with China in Taiwan and Philippines, with Russia and Ukraine, with what's taking place in the Middle East, what's taking place in African nations. It's everywhere. It is everywhere. So we're going to talk briefly about that because President Biden wants to set up a summit in a third country, a neutral country, to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And I guess they just want to sort of hash things out, sort of see if they can calm what's going on out there. Now, let's hope that that's the case. But I don't know if I'm putting a lot of faith and confidence in Joe Biden. However, he's the president of the United States. I want the United States to succeed. I don't want another conflict. I don't want another war, especially one that we're involved with, let alone anybody else. But enough is enough. So we'll pay attention to this closely. And then we have some news on the vaccine front. Johnson & Johnson, their vaccine is now being put on hold because a handful of individuals have suffered from blood clots. Blood clots is also something that is plaguing the AstraZeneca vaccine. So, interesting question would be, with all of the billions, and I mean billions with the B, dollars, that Uncle Sam, meaning you and me, the U.S. taxpayer, have given these pharmaceutical companies, some of the largest corporations in the world, okay, so we're giving them billions of dollars for these vaccines. If they don't work, are they going to give us the money back? Something tells me they're not. Now, we still have a long way to go till we determine whether or not this vaccine is just going to be completely pulled from use or not, but the question still remains, if that should happen. And I don't care which one it is, if it's Johnson & Johnson, if it's Moderna, if it's Pfizer, I don't care which one it is. It's billions and billions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, going to these corporations. Of course, we can't sue them either. They're immune. They okay, no pun intended, but they are immune from legal action. Because this is under Operation Warp Speed. This is emergency use authorization. But I don't care. I mean, if it doesn't work, or if it's actually hurting people, the very least, we better get our money back. But something tells me that won't happen if that should be the case. Then we're also informed by Israel that the South African variant of COVID-19 can penetrate through the Pfizer vaccine. So what's this going to mean? How prevalent is the South African variant going to be? Because that's going to knock another vaccine off the block. Perhaps, potentially. Again, this is the continuation of the story. This is the continuation of the Milgram experiment. Keep cranking the dial, keep pushing the button. And this is the justification to keep cranking the dial and pushing the button. Remain afraid. Remain in your homes. Remain in lockdown. And with other variants that are circulating out there, they're now saying that it affects younger people, which of course was not the story, I guess, with the original COVID-19. That was more for older people. That was more for people that had comorbidities, people that were already unhealthy to begin with. They were overweight, they smoked, they had diabetes, whatever. Now, it's younger people, they say, that is being affected by these other strains of COVID-19. What this tells me, anyway, is this is a signal that they're going to put us back under lockdown. Because we have the spring and summer months ahead of us. People are restless. People are tired of being under restrictions and lockdowns as it is, and rightly so. And the weather is getting nicer. People want to go out. They want to enjoy life. They want to enjoy their friends, their family. They want to go back, if they still exist, to some of their favorite restaurants and bars and outdoor scenes and activities. And they're going to say, well, look at all of these young people out there. How reckless, how irresponsible. And there might be a spike in cases here or a spike in cases there. And guess what? If they can get away with it, they will put us, whether that's in the U.S. or in Europe or anywhere else for that matter, they will put us under lockdown and restrictions once again. And depending on where you are, I know in the state of California, supposedly, they are supposed to be 100% open come, I believe, June 15th. So we still have a couple months away for the state of California to open up at 100% capacity. And the state of California is one of the largest economies on the planet if it were standalone. So there is still an immense amount of economic damage that is being done on a daily basis. And they may very well lock down again if there's an increase in cases or whatever the story they want to push out there. So it's somewhat comical, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word, that we're starting to see more people get vaccinated, yet we're starting to see an increase in cases once again, too. I thought that was supposed to be the opposite, right? Operation Warp Speed, all of these billions and billions of taxpayer dollars going out to these mega corporations to generate a vaccine. People get vaccinated. Cases are supposed to go down. No, cases are going up. If you look at India, their cases, their daily cases are higher than they've ever been. And they have a couple different strains, I guess, circulating over there as well. Are these vaccines going to be any good for them? Or are they going to be rendered ineffective, useless? And we have to start this whole thing over again. Then you have a top official out of China, and we'll take this for what it's worth, but they're claiming that their vaccine is basically a coin toss. It's 50-50. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. So now they're going to have to go back to the drawing board and come up with another one. And of course, now it depends on the vaccine. Some of these vaccines, you got to get 2 doses. Johnson & Johnson was just a one and done. But nonetheless, they are continuing to say that you're going to have to get the jab in another 6 months. And then probably another 6 months thereafter. Especially if COVID-19 and its various number of variants that are circulating around continue to exist. So they're going to continue to crank the dial, push the buttons, or to get us to crank the dial and push the buttons. And it's going to leave one economy in ruin after the next. And that may very well be another reason why people take to the streets to protest and or riot. I hope it's peaceful protest. There's a lot of things to peacefully protest. I don't want them to turn into riots, but from what we have been witnessing, that's very likely what would transpire. So that's one thing. Because if these lockdowns come again and businesses cannot take it, parents cannot take it, obviously in the summer you're not going to have as much school going on, but nonetheless, you still have to deal with everything. Can't send kids to camp, can't go on vacations, can't, relieve some stress and do some fun things. So there's going to be, I think, a lot of frustration if there are further lockdowns and restrictions, and I think this time it'll get people out onto the streets in this country, and I hope that does happen, because enough's enough. Inflation figures, we have the U.S. consumer price inflation jumping to 2.6% in March, the highest since August of 2018, and above market consensus of 2.5%. A base effect is also weighing, as last year the pandemic dented economic activity and lowered consumer demand and prices. And on a monthly basis, consumer prices increased 0.6%, the most since 2012. So it is those base effects is where the Federal Reserve is going to take refuge. It's where they're going to take cover for their argument that inflation, if it should exist, is only going to be transitory in nature, meaning temporary. I don't believe this is going to be the case, but that's their narrative because that's the narrative they want to spin. Now, this data comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the same government department, agency, that calculates the unemployment rate. The Federal Reserve has been taking issue with the official unemployment rate. No, it's not 6.3%. When they first challenged it, now it's down to 6%. No, that's not correct. It's closer to 10%. So clearly, the Federal Reserve wants to question the official unemployment rate, but do they want to question the official inflation figure, the CPI? So far, no, they don't. But will there come a time when they say, we don't believe it, or it's still transitory? I mean, how long is transitory? For some time. What does that mean? 1 quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters, a whole, a full year, a year and a half? What's transitory, Mr. Powell? Scott Pelley of CBS couldn't even ask him that. What does this mean? Press these people on these questions. Demand answers. Get them on the record. That's what the media is supposed to be about. In 60 Minutes, it's supposed to be this mainstay of American journalism. It's supposed to be this gold standard. Everybody tunes in on Sunday evening to watch 60 Minutes because they're the gold standard. That was laughable. That was a disgrace. That was a disservice to the American people, what took place in that interview. There are supposed to be very serious conversations that the American people should be having with our elected officials and unelected officials such as Jay Powell and the members of the Federal Reserve, because whatever they do, they just do. There's no oversight. There's no checks and balances. They just do it and they get away with it. We are borrowing more money than we are bringing in through taxation. Let me repeat that. We are borrowing more money than we are bringing in through taxation. So what's the point of having taxes? That would have been a serious question for Scott Pelley in 60 Minutes to ask Jay Powell. If this time is going to be quote-unquote different, I don't believe that's going to be the case, but let's say for the sake of argument that it is. Okay, this time's different. We are in a different era. We are living in a new paradigm. The old economic thought is out the window. It no longer exists. We can print money, we can borrow money, we can spend it, and it has no negative consequences whatsoever. So, Mr. Powell, why do we have to have taxes? I would at least respect that conversation. We're supposed to be a government of, by, and for the people. Should we not have a say in what takes place? I think we do, and I think we should, but that's not going to happen. And no politician is banging on the table, knocking down doors to get answers to these types of questions either, because they love this crap. And don't fall for it now that the Republicans are no longer the majority power, the majority that have the power in government. Don't fall for it that now they're all of a sudden principled and fiscally conservative. Don't be stupid and don't have a short memory. These people voted for all the nonsense that we are dealing with today as well. 96-0, no votes for America. Don't forget it. They didn't care then. The only reason they care now is because they are not the party in power. Period. End of story. They would have kept going. Maybe not to the same degree as the Democrats. I'll give you that. The Democrats are completely out of control. But it's not as if the Republicans are in or were in control either. They're not. That's why you have to leave these parties. You have to leave them immediately. So that's that. Market performance will continue. We have the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100 hitting all-time highs, and we'll get to overnight futures in a moment. The dollar index is at 91.75, so it has been pulling back recently. Bitcoin hitting a record, trading above $63,000 a coin. Again, over $63,000 a coin. They have some pretty broad-based dollar weakness across the board. Biggest declines against the Australian dollar and the New Zealand dollar in the overnight session. Overnight futures markets, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is down about 0.1%. The S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100 are both flat. Cash trade in Japan is in the red as well, down about 0.5%. And a sea of green across the pond in Europe, but nothing major. Cash trade on Australia is also in the green, putting on a gain of about 0.25%, and Chinese stocks are currently flat. And just because I like to say it, Tesla being the poster child of the everything bubble, and it's amazing how this number always comes back up around, up 8%, down 8%. Tesla put on a gain of 8.6% today, putting on a gain of 60 points to trade at $762 a share. Johnson & Johnson, with the bad news, only down 1.3%, probably because the market understands that, well, it might not be good news, but they're probably not going to have to give back the about $1.5–2 billion that Uncle Sam gave them. So it's not that bad of a deal. They can't be sued. So, what's the difference? It's down 1.3%. We'll act like we care, and then this thing might very well take off once again. On the commodity front, WTI is at $60.64 a barrel, Brent $64.14, natural gas $2.62, all in the green today and all green overnight as well. Gold and silver had a good day today. Gold $1,744 an ounce, silver $25.43 an ounce, and copper is still hanging on at $4.05 a pound. And lumber, $1,180 per 1,000 linear board feet. Outrageous, and it appears that upward price pressure is probably going to continue for some time because the building frenzy is likely going to continue. So that'll continue to put demand on the price of lumber, and there are still some labor shortages out there across various mills in the country. Now, as we understand it, due to the increase in the price of lumber, this is adding about $24,000 to the average new home construction. $24,000. So we're already in a market in many parts of the country and in other countries where real estate is just insanely red hot. I mean, properties going sight unseen, tens of thousands of dollars above ask, maybe even six figures above ask, depending on the market, depending on the size of the home. And now you're just continuing to price out people more and more. They can't get involved. They have no money to put down. $24,000 is not chump change. And that's just for lumber. Now you take into consideration copper prices, take into consideration drywall or any other type of building and construction materials. I mean, it's going to be very difficult for a lot of these costs to be passed on. And that's what we're going to be contending with. And this is just getting started. This is not going to be transitory. And then lastly, Uncle Sam's 10-year junk note is at 1.62%. 1.62%, which brings me to another question that we should be asking our fearless leaders at the Federal Reserve. What is going to be the threshold on the 10-year note that you now say the economy is slowing down, it's stagnant, it's in contraction? What rate is that, what yield is that going to have to show on the 10-year junk note? Because the narrative that we are being told is that these increases to these yields is indicative of a growing economy. Well, then conversely, wouldn't that mean if they're rolling over, if they're going down, that is indicative of a weakening economy or a weak economy or one that is in or about to enter contraction? So what's going to be that magic number? Is it 1.6%, 1.5, 1.4? What is that number? That's a question that needs to be asked too. What's that line in the sand? They won't answer it, but it needs to be asked. And another thing when it comes to narratives, for how many weeks have we been told there's the great rotation taking place in the stock market? Investors are getting out of NASDAQ and tech companies. Yeah, well, NASDAQ 100 just hit an all-time high. So I don't think they're getting out of it, which of course we called nonsense and a bunch of bull to begin with out of the gate. Looks like we proved right on that one once again. Now on to the Derek Chauvin case taking place in Minnesota. And of course, the other recent tragic news that took place in Minnesota with another young man being killed at the hands of the police the other day is causing more protests and riots in Minnesota, very close to where the trial is taking place. So in this instance, you had a young man who was pulled over, I believe, for an expired registration or something to do with his vehicle, license plate, what have you, and police ran his plates, and lo and behold, there was a warrant out for his arrest. So they attempt to arrest him. They have him out of the vehicle, attempting to put handcuffs on the young man, and he attempts to flee. So he's resisting arrest. A female officer pulls out what she believes to be her taser, and you can see on her body cam and you can hear her saying taser, 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 basically warning the other officers that she is going to be using her taser. But she did not pull out her taser. She pulled out her handgun, and she shot the young man, and he is now dead. So you can imagine the uproar that this is causing. And she has resigned from the police force, and so has the police chief of that department. Now, I don't know why he resigned. I can understand why she would have resigned or perhaps even have been fired. But the police chief, I don't get that one. But everybody has their reasons. I can understand. So, to the Derek Chauvin trial. Obviously, I'm not watching every moment of it all day, but I have caught a good several hours of it in aggregate. I think we're on day, I don't even know what we are, day 11, day 12 of the trial, something like that. The prosecution has rested their case, and, they had some good witnesses for their side, and I think the defense was able to poke holes in most of the witnesses that they had up there. And today the defense started their case, and I think the prosecution was able to poke holes in their witnesses as well. Now, you have to understand that the standard that has to be met is beyond a reasonable doubt. And there are a few charges that are levied against Derek Chauvin. I believe it's second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and then a manslaughter charge. If he's likely to be convicted of anything, I think it's most likely going to be the manslaughter charge. This, I'm not necessarily going to make a prediction because the trial is not over. There's still more witnesses to be heard. Perhaps even Derek Chauvin will take the stand. There are some people who are arguing that would be a good move for him to do because then you can get a better understanding as to what was going through his mind. And then you could just, have to determine, the jury would have to determine the veracity of his statements because clearly the man doesn't want to go to jail. So is he telling the truth or is he just saying what he has to say to not go to jail? But nonetheless, he could at least state his case if he thinks that that is the best move for his defense. So the good thing about our judicial system, our legal system, is that the burden of proof is on the state. It's on the prosecution. The defendant is innocent until proven guilty. And in a criminal case, the threshold that needs to be met is beyond a reasonable doubt. So as long as the defense can frame it that the state has not made their case, then you acquit. If there's enough evidence that has been put forward by the state, then you convict. And of course, the question will be, what charge will the jury convict him on, or will they acquit? Now, today, the defense brought on their use of force expert to argue as to whether or not Derek Chauvin being on the back, the neck of George Floyd was appropriate. And this individual said that it was fine. George Floyd being on his belly in the prone position on the street, that was fine for a number of reasons. I'm not going to hash out all of that. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube or somewhere else. But one of the sticking points that the prosecution was going after this witness on had to deal with whether or not George Floyd was feeling pain or not, being in that position and with the officer on his back. And it was, there was some back and forth on it. The witness used some language that probably was not very helpful to the defense, basically saying that George Floyd in that position could have been comfortable. I don't think that was the right choice of words, but basically I think what the witness was trying to get across was that there was not necessarily a painful position, okay, in and of itself, laying on one's stomach. I mean, my goodness, how many thousands, if not millions of people sleep on their stomachs. Now, of course, you're not on asphalt, but nonetheless, is that pain or is that discomfort being on asphalt? I think that's a difference. Now, having somebody on your back or on your neck, of course, is going to be even more discomforting and, of course, could very well be painful. But what does that have to do with anything? I mean, seriously. Because I think what the prosecution was basically trying to get across was that if Mr. Floyd was feeling pain, then Derek Chauvin should have gotten off of him. I don't necessarily know if I would make that connection. I mean, would the converse be true? I mean, say for the sake of example, Mr. Floyd or anybody who was under arrest started hurting a police officer. Does the police officer just get to say, you hurt me, and the suspect is just going to stop? I don't think it works that way. So is the police officer, just because the suspect says, I'm in pain, I'm hurting, yada, 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 that they have to stop doing what they're doing? I don't think so. Now, there's enough question to be asked, obviously, as to the amount of time that Mr. Chauvin was on top of Mr. Floyd. That is a completely rational question to ask. That is what's at stake here. Does that rise to a crime? Because that's what he's on trial for. The state is making the case that yes, it does, and that you could potentially, as a jury, you can convict him of these charges: second-degree murder, third-degree murder, or some sort of manslaughter charge. The defense is going to make the argument that there were other circumstances at play. Mr. Floyd was on drugs. Mr. Floyd had a heart condition or other health conditions that led to his death. That's for the jury to decide, obviously, and it's not going to be an easy case to decide. There's a lot of emotions surrounding this. Everybody's aware of it, especially these people in Minnesota. And, it's a very emotional trial. There have been emotional witnesses on the stand. Some people are criticizing the judge for allowing some of those witnesses on the stand because they really didn't add any value to the case in hand from an evidentiary standpoint. But they were emotional, and of course that can tear at the heartstrings, and understandably so. I mean, this is a tragedy. This should not have happened. Discussed this last year. I remember the podcast title. $20 a crime, 20 trillion ain't. Because George Floyd was allegedly attempting to use a counterfeit $20 bill, and that's why the police were called. And I don't even know if Mr. Floyd knew that he had a counterfeit $20 bill in his possession. And of course, he was on drugs as well, had drugs in his system. So the whole thing's bad. But, it's sort of at the end of the day, Derek Chauvin is not responsible for Mr. Floyd having a counterfeit $20 bill in his possession, whether he knew it or not. Mr. Chauvin is not responsible for George Floyd ingesting drugs. And he's not responsible for Mr. Floyd sort of resisting arrest and jostling around and getting out of the police vehicle. I mean, if there was strict and straight-up compliance from the get-go, handcuffed, put into the back of the vehicle, end of story. But that's not what happened. So now you're in this situation where unfortunately this man, this father, this brother, friend is dead. Shouldn't have happened. Shouldn't have happened. But is Derek Chauvin responsible, and if he is, to what degree? That's what the jury is going to have to contend with. And I think regardless of the decision by the jury, there is going to be protests and riots in Minnesota. Whether he's convicted or acquitted, there is going to be most definitely if he is acquitted. But I even think if he is found guilty of one of those charges, there will still be protests and riots. I mean, just think of a school team or a professional team, athletic team that wins the Super Bowl or some championship. People go out into the streets and stuff happens. They light cars on fire, they flip them over, they break stuff. So, I mean, it could be celebratory, or it could be, my God, how corrupt the judicial system is, blah, 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 playing into that narrative. And, we'll see what happens. I have nothing against peaceful protests. That's what we stand for in this country. I do not stand for the riots, but I do imagine that's what's going to be taking place this summer, to put it mildly. I hope I'm wrong. Well, we covered a lot of material. A lot of this is going to be a moving target, from vaccines, geopolitical nonsense, this trial, other trials, the economic calamity that we continue to monitor. But that's why we do this day in and day out. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Kapital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.